I'm a generalist. I'm a primary care physician, and most of my professional life, my focus has been on taking care of women, though I've taken care of men and women, but my focus has been women's health. And I would say my focus is more, it's always on the full spectrum of health, but more of an emphasis on preventive health and wellness. So I've always been as concerned about how people stay healthy in addition to what we as physicians have to offer in terms of helping people get better when they're sick. I became interested in yoga 36 years ago when I was pregnant with my first child. And I was interested in natural childbirth. And the childbirth educator who I was working with suggested yoga as an additional kind of complementary methodology to the kind of natural childbirth approach that she was using. So I took a yoga class. I took a series of yoga classes, prenatal yoga, when I was pregnant with my first child, and I had a wonderful birth experience. And I think part of it was yoga, part of it was the childbirth training. And I stopped when my daughter was born. And when I was pregnant with my second child 5 years later, I returned to yoga and also had a really positive experience. Now, about 20 years ago, I had moved to State College, and my oldest child went off to college, and I said to myself, well, there's time in my life. What am I going to do with that time? Am I going to work more, or am I going to find something else? And I returned to yoga, and that's when I started really practicing in earnest and found the Center for Wellbeing here. And my initial experience with yoga 35 years ago in Berkeley was also with Iyengar yoga. So that kind of strain and that influence has been there all along for me, though I left it for a while and then came back to it. One of the things that yoga has done for me is it's helped me physically and emotionally in lots of different ways. And so I've read a lot about yoga. I've read about the power of yoga, but I've also experienced it. And so for me, those two things together really kind of complement one another and have helped me appreciate what yoga can do for health and wellness. So part of it is a purely intellectual and to some extent scientific analysis of what's out there in terms of evidence, and then the other part is a very personal experience, feeling first the way that yoga helped me in childbirth, and then the way that it's helped me stay healthy and address some health problems over the years personally. I am trained as a physician, and so a part of my thinking is very scientific. And one of the things that I've found interesting, and this is really only in the last, 10 or 15 years, is that there has been an increasing amount of research kind of conducted in the very traditional Western medicine ways of research, case-controlled studies, prospective studies looking at one group of people who have, let's say, an experience with Iyengar yoga and another group of people who are not offered that, and what's the outcome for those two groups. And there's more evidence now for certain conditions to suggest that yoga can really impact health and well-being in a variety of ways. Not necessarily for every illness and for every condition, but there's really good evidence about the positive impact of yoga on people with low back pain. Well, low back pain is one of the most common maladies that keeps people away from work, takes people to doctor visits, and results in pain and disability, lost work time, all those things. And there are studies that show that a structured program of Iyengar yoga twice a week for a period of time, I think it was something like 90 days, reduces the amount of pain they have, reduces the amount of depression that they have, and so that's fairly compelling to me. There's some evidence in certain kinds of arthritis that yoga is helpful, and there's definitely evidence that yoga has some physiologic impact. So it will lower blood pressure, it will lower heart rate in most people who practice it over time, and that can have very positive health benefits. Will it cure cancer? Will it cure infections? I don't think so, but I think there is some good evidence that in some conditions it's powerful. A year ago, I had to have open heart surgery to repair my mitral valve, which is one of the valves in the heart. And there was no question that I needed the surgery. I went through a fairly long process of decision making and was certain that I needed to have the surgery. And at that point, I was a pretty experienced yoga practitioner, and so I wanted to see if I could use yoga to help me both before the surgery and after the surgery in terms of recovery. And I consulted with my teachers who gave me advice, and I thought about what would make sense for me, and I found that yoga was helpful. It was helpful in many different ways, not just physically, and it was helpful physically, but it was also helpful emotionally. I found that some of the breath work in yoga, the pranayama work, really helped calm my nerves. There were certain kinds of breathing I did actually right before I had the surgery, when I was in the pre-op area. I had to explain to the doctors what I was doing because I wasn't sure they would understand, but I found it really deeply calming, and so that helped me tremendously. And then after the surgery, the surgery required that my sternum, my breastbone, was cut in half and then wired together. So there was a lot of healing that had to happen, and I did, for probably the first 3 weeks after the surgery, I did only restorative yoga. Lying on the floor on one blanket felt like a really radical exercise to do. But slowly I was able to build from that and get to the point where I could sit normally. Now I'm slumping, so. So it was a gradual process. For me, it was one of these experiences where it was a constant in my life. So of course it was going to be part of my experience of surgery and recovery. And I'm pretty convinced that my recovery went more smoothly because of my yoga practice. I can't prove that, but it was a source of comfort. It was a source of quiet. It was something I could do every day for myself, and there are times during the illness that I felt fairly helpless. So it was wonderful to be able to do something to keep me moving forward. I was planning to go up for assessment for my certification assessment as a Iyengar teacher, And because of the surgery, I had decided to delay that. And my teachers said to me, and this was before the surgery, they said, well, maybe you won't have to delay it. Maybe it's worth leaving the door open and seeing how your recovery goes, and perhaps you'll surprise yourself and you'll be able to move forward with the assessment. And in fact, they were right, and my recovery was so smooth that I was able to go forward and do the assessment. And that was in December, which was 5 months after my surgery. So it surprised me, and it's in a way it surprised us all, but it was wonderful. I'm a certified teacher, but I'm not certified to do therapeutic work at all. So I still think it's important for us to hear from students what their worries are, what their concerns are, what their conditions are. And to some extent, if those are minor, I think our job is to address them by offering modifications as we're teaching a class. But if someone has very complicated problems and they're struggling in class, or they're problems that we're unfamiliar with and not certain about, I always seek the advice of my senior teachers, because even as a physician, I know how to treat someone as a medical doctor, but that doesn't mean that I know what to do in yoga class with a student who has a particular condition. So I think it's best to be conservative, and I think it's best to not take on too much, to listen, to be compassionate with students, but to not pretend that we can do things we can't do.